Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just giving it a few seconds here to let everybody get into the conference, and we will get started shortly. All right, we'll go ahead and get started now. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's conversation, The Midwest States Tackle Broadband. I'm Deb Kidwell with the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, and I will be your moderator today. In addition, we have Katie Chalk, Mary Roberson, and Jenny Parks assisting with today's call, so you may hear from them as well as questions come in. Very quickly, our ground rules for today's call are: be aware that this session is being recorded and all participants are muted. The recording will be made available. The presentation slides are available under the Handouts tab. We have also included a resources handout that includes links about broadband and our presenters' projects. Each of our panelists will speak for about 15 minutes. Please submit any questions that you may have via the question box, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the panelists' presentations. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will be sending out a survey and would appreciate any feedback we may have from you. Katie or Mary, have I missed anything?
Nope, you haven't.
Great. So today's topic is the issue of broadband. As I'm sure most of you know, broadband access was an issue long before COVID-19, but COVID-19 certainly brought the message home. The challenges show up every time a student is parked in a McDonald's parking lot trying to get free Wi-Fi, or as I know we all are familiar with, our image freezing during a conference call, or even laptops just being shared amongst family members. We have research showing that this is an issue that is bringing out equity issues around low-income, rural, and/or first-generation learners, and that these gaps continue to grow whether or not the schools are actually open. We also know that every state has different challenges when we're talking about how to implement broadband for their constituents. So we thought we'd start today by getting feedback on your state's particular challenges. So Katie, can you go ahead with our first poll?
See the answers in about 20% of you have voted. So I'll give you another couple seconds to vote. All right, it looks like a majority of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And share with you results.
Great, it looks like availability and affordability of services is the biggest issue that came up from you. So great, thank you so much for that. So where are we now? We need to find solutions that will work and implement those solutions. It's going to involve efforts from all aspects of our society, and there's likely not going to be any one solution that works for all, at least not today. We may need to look at our legislation, both new legislation and old legislation. Higher ed institutions are already finding new ways to connect with students. What we hope to highlight today is some of the work that is being done by our Midwestern colleagues in these areas. So please welcome today Representative Rick Carfagna from Ohio, and he is going to share his approach to solving broadband issues through legislative actions such as Ohio's Residential Broadband Expansion Program. His approach to legislation incorporates his experience at city, township, and county levels, dealing firsthand with constituents struggling to access broadband and exploring options to get services extended to their households. Dr. Marshall Stewart, Vice Chancellor for the University of Missouri's Extension and Engagement Program and Chief Engagement Officer at the system level, will describe the process that they used in the plan that was developed to bring broadband to underserved Bollinger County, Missouri, as well as their new free web-based resource, the Missouri Broadband Resource Rail. Mr. Dwayne Schell, Chief Technology Officer for the North Dakota Information Technology Department, will share how North Dakota used data and partnered with carriers to get broadband services to where they were most needed to bridge the home access gap. And finally, Mr. Adrian Segura, Deputy Chief of Family and Community Engagement and Education for Chicago Public Schools, will discuss the Chicago Connected Initiative to providing stable high-speed internet access to students who need it the most. And with that, I will turn the controls over to our first presenter, Representative Carfagna.
Thank you, Deb. What a great introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? Loud and clear. Good. Thanks. Well, before I get into the residential broadband legislation that is moving through the legislative process, I kind of wanted to set the table a little bit for what's going on in the Buckeye State. So there was a study back in 2017 by The Ohio State University that indicated that there are 1 million Ohioans that lack access to reliable high-speed internet service. They might have access to maybe a wireless product or even a slower version of DSL or some other things, but it's probably pretty spotty in nature or just generally not reliable. So 1 million Ohioans in that boat. Connected Nation, their affiliate Connected Ohio, did a study which indicated there are 300,000 households here in Ohio that have no access to high-speed internet. Now, primarily those are going to be in more of the rural areas of the state. But what I've always kind of categorized it as is you have two different buckets of unserved households throughout Ohio. I mean, you've got kind of the large swaths of the rural areas where, very low density, it's just really hard to reach with wires. But then you also have what I would kind of call a marbling effect, even in our urban and our suburban areas, that for whatever reason, there were pockets or streets here and there that were just simply left behind. I hail from Central Ohio, so I reside in one of the suburbs of Columbus, and I'm actually in one of the more affluent, prosperous counties in the state. And even in my own township, in my own community, we have unserved areas. I was a former township trustee before I got elected as state representative, and anecdotally, I can recall there was a cul-de-sac of around 13 homes that these homes were probably $500,000 homes, and they had no access to high-speed internet because the developer, for whatever reason, did not want to pay the utility copay charges, and so they did not run cable lines. They did not run upgraded phone and DSL lines. So these people were literally using their cell phones to try to communicate through emails, and that's again a very affluent, prosperous part of Central Ohio. So before I get into House Bill 13, which is my legislation, I do want to commend Governor Mike DeWine and Lieutenant Governor John Husted. When they took office in January of last year, leading up to that, they had made broadband expansion a central point of their campaign platform, and that was extremely refreshing to hear. To that effect, last December, they issued what is known as the Ohio Broadband Strategy, and I will hold this up. If you go to innovateohio.gov, you can download a copy of it and check it out. But for the very first time, they came up with a strategy in order to increase the penetration of this infrastructure. So, they touched upon a lot of different aspects. I mean, telehealth is something they want to promote. They want to have a statewide grant program, which is essentially my legislation. They're talking about regulatory reform and find ways to leverage our interstate system to run fiber and sensors along there for data analytics, and also leveraging our public rights-of-way, quite frankly, to make it easier for some of the private carriers to attach their equipment and get it out easier. But it's a really good strategy. We've already begun to implement several things in that, which, by the way, kind of leads up to the $50 million recently in CARES Act funds. This was back at the end of July. Lieutenant Governor Houston announced that the state was going to set aside $50 million of state funding through the Federal CARES Act, and that was going to be to provide hotspots and internet-enabled devices to students for purchases that were made between July 1st and December 30th of this year. So they've already doled out that money. I think there were just under 950 combined either individual buildings or school districts that are going to be receiving a number of different levels of grant funding for these purposes. So eligible expenses would be things like home internet that is paid by the district for students, hotspots with the service plan, mobile hotspots, including on buses, public Wi-Fi infrastructure, and other technology that would provide a connection for the student. So, we've known that we've had this divide here in the state of Ohio. But, really this pandemic has really laid bare those disparities. I tell people you can't work from home if you don't have a high-speed internet connection. Your children cannot participate in virtual distance learning without a high-speed internet connection. We've seen an amazing proliferation of telehealth options here in Ohio. And, anecdotally, Nationwide Children's Hospital, which is located here in Columbus, in all of 2019, they had 50 total telehealth consults. Through summer of this year, they have had over 50,000. So we know that telehealth works. It's an extraordinary resource that's getting out into rural areas in particular where, we know that, healthcare professionals are already pretty scarce. But, if you don't have a high-speed internet connection to access those services, it really is a wasted resource. And that's a terrible tragedy. During the pandemic, during the shutdowns here in Ohio, we had scores of people that found themselves unemployed. And really, there's two ways to file for unemployment here in Ohio. You can phone it in and call the call center for JFS, Job and Family Services, or you can file online. And now the key to filing online is you can do it 24 hours a day, and you don't have to wait on a phone. However, if you don't have a high-speed internet connection, that option's not available to you. And then finally, we're in a presidential election year, and we had to reschedule, unfortunately, our primary election date, and we had to move it to all absentee voting by mail. And if you want to go online and download an absentee ballot application to send it into your Board of Elections and request a ballot, now you had to take an extra step if you can't go online and do that. So to add insult on injury on all of this, traditionally, as Deb mentioned, we had kids that would go to McDonald's to do their homework, or they would go to the library. That was the fallback option. They would go to the library and utilize the computer labs, or they would go, to a restaurant of some kind. But, during the shutdown, we did away with dine-in options. The libraries all closed down, so we took away that fallback option for so many people who already did not have access to this critical resource. So, what we witnessed were, lots of people sitting in parking lots at all hours of the day. Even before the pandemic, our Ohio Library Council testified during the budget process. They had one library in Southeast Ohio where over 50% of their Wi-Fi usage occurred when the library was closed. And that's very profound when you think about it, that you would have a parking lot filled up after hours at nighttime, and to see just the little lights on in the car where people would literally drive up with their children so they could do their homework, or so that they could check their email, or so they could apply for a job or look for a job. So, it's a very, tragic state of affairs with regards to the haves and the have-nots. And I've always maintained that high-speed internet, it is the great social equalizer of our time. It has yielded a wide variety of economic, cultural, educational, social resources to our communities. The internet instantaneously brings together knowledge and marketplaces and people together across oceans. So, it's been a priority of mine. As Deb indicated, I worked for Time Warner Cable prior to taking office. I worked for 14 years in local government affairs for Time Warner Cable, kind of serving as a liaison to hundreds of our communities that we serve. And then I also served as a local township trustee. So I kind of was able to bridge both of those two perspectives when I took office as a state representative. knowing how severe the problem is. I had a good handle on the economics of why my company could not extend their plant further to pick up some of these unserved households. But then I found myself on the other end where I would have to advocate for the homes in my community that could not get it. So what I tried to pull together was some kind of a creative way to get over the cost barriers, because we know that it really comes down to just making that initial capital investment. So as a freshman legislator in my first term, I came out and what I had proposed was something really small scale in nature. I did not want to be the freshman who came in proposing a moonshot of a program where I'm asking for billions of dollars to just cure this problem statewide. What I wanted to do was to try to establish a modest program that was going to chip away a little bit, maybe street by street, pocket by pocket of these homes, and really kind of prove its worth over time. It's something that we could grow and make more scalable. Like I said, when Governor DeWine came into office last year, we had conversations with his office, and frankly, they came back and they challenged us. And they said, look, if we're going to do this, let's make it meaningful. Let's be expansive. Let's be aggressive, which was just very refreshing to hear. So I spent last year taking my program and simplifying it and making it much more expansive to get into our rural areas. To that effect, Governor DeWine has pledged $20 million behind our effort, which I'm very proud of. Originally, I'd asked for $2 million, which $2 million is not going to get you too far. But again, it was something that I was trying to start small with. And we know that 20 million is not going to take us, all the way to where we need to be, but it's going to be a very good start out of the gate. So what the program does, House Bill 13, now that I've gotten to it, we would house this under, it's currently proposed under the Department of Commerce here in Ohio. We're probably going to be moving over to Development Services Agency, but it'll be housed under one of those two agencies. And really what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for all providers, private providers in this state, whether you're cable, whether you're phone, fixed wireless or satellite, or our rural electric cooperatives. And we're going to allow them to come in and make an ask. And we want to prioritize the unserved households in this state. It is a residential only program. But what we're not going to do, we're not going to fully fund these projects. What I want them to do is I want them to sharpen their pencils, and I want them to outline, look, here is a given set of homes that we intend to build out to. It costs X amount of dollars to do this. We can justify so much of this within our current construction build out formula. So we want them to identify that and then outline, well, what is the cost barrier that is otherwise precluding you from building out on your own without any intervention by the state government. So once we isolate what that cost hurdle is, that's what we want to focus on. That's what we want to fund. I've already had one private provider that has come to me and shared an example. They said, look, we've identified, I think it was around 1,300, 1,400 homes out in a rural county that currently is without any access to broadband whatsoever. And they said it's going to be a $2.3 million project. And I said, okay. And they said, well, we can justify 2 million of it within our own construction model. So in that instance, it fails by 300,000. So what we would be looking at doing is to fund that project to the tune of 300,000 out of that $20 million fund that would be established. And then that way, the provider goes and builds it. We would want to make sure that these are reliable. It's a reliable service. We have established the minimum speeds as 25 megs download and 3 megs upload. But that's what we want to do. So we've got a lot of controls in place. We've got a lot of enthusiasm for it. We've already gotten it voted out of the House. It is pending in the Senate, and we will see where things go. But we are going to be entering in a lame duck here shortly once we get out of the election season. But everything that I'm hearing, I've been having interested party meetings across the street. There's a lot of excitement and momentum for this. I've just been very fortunate that we've had a lot of cooperation from the industry. We were very sensitive about making sure this was a technologically neutral program. we want to have all options available. We understand with the topography of this state that there's going to be some areas where, look, it makes sense to run, you know, a hardwire, you know, internet connection, whether you're running fiber transport or fiber to the home or coax fiber hybrid or even twisted pair. But you know, there's going to be other areas where it's just not going to lend itself to that, and we're going to have to focus on a fixed wireless solution or a satellite option. So, you know, we want everybody to put on their thinking caps to, you know, identify the households out there that they'd like to capture as market share, and we'll see what happens. But I'm very excited, and I guess I'll stop there, and we can open up for questions or proceed on and circle back later.
I think it's my turn to pick it up there, and thank you, Representative, for a great overview. And certainly the people of Ohio are very fortunate to have you as an advocate inside there, and it's great to hear the great things going on there. I'm Marshall Stewart. I serve as Vice Chancellor of Extension and Engagement for the University of Missouri and Chief Engagement Officer for the University of Missouri System. And it's my pleasure to be with the Compact today to talk a little bit about what we are doing in Missouri, certainly looking at other states like Ohio and others that are working in this space. I came to the university a little over 4 years ago, having spent most of my career at North Carolina State University. And when I got here, one of the things that I began to do was to really go around the state and begin to understand what this state's about. As a land-grant university, one of the things that we're very committed to is learning about the state and aligning with the needs and the opportunities that lie in the state of Missouri. So in doing that, as we begin to do that, and hopefully these slides are going to move for me. If not, I'll have to get someone else to do that. Let's see. They're not moving. I'm going to let you move the slides, the person that's in control there. If you go to next slide. As we begin to travel the state, what we found was a lot of opportunity. In the first 100 days that I was here, there's 114 counties in the state, and I was in roughly 100 of those, traveling, learning, listening at the community level. And as we did that, what we found was there was a tremendous amount of opportunity in Missouri yet to be tapped. And we believe that the university, in particular, the University of Missouri, could have a big play in that. The system, as we think about the University of Missouri system, includes 4 universities, Mizzou here in Columbia, as well as UMKC, University of Missouri St. Louis, and Missouri S&T. And collectively, we thought we could do some better things, could really grow some areas of the state if we got serious about it and aligned our research and all of our intellectual opportunities and capacities against that. So as we began to do that, we saw great opportunities, and those opportunities, we go to the next slide, really were on 3 different pillars. And those pillars were the economy, education, and health. I don't think those areas would be very different in about any state, but they came out strong. People were really concerned about where the economy was going, where is the next generation going to have a better opportunity than they had. They were really concerned about K-12 education in particular, and that ties into workforce development, community colleges. Are we really moving the needle there? They were also really concerned about health. We have what we refer to as a lot of health deserts in the state of Missouri, places where people don't have access to a primary care physician, dentist, perhaps a rural hospital was once there, no longer there. So we just saw a lot of opportunity. And so we began to craft a strategy for the university, and then as a university system, of how do we lean into that? What can we do to really grow the economy? What can we do to bring our research around to that? What can we do to really enhance K-12 education? What can we do to really enhance health and all the health needs of the state? And as we begin to look at that, we saw dead center of that, this thing called broadband. In rural Missouri, which makes up a large percentage of the state, if you take out Kansas City, St. Louis, Columbia, Springfield, those larger metro areas, you're really looking at almost 100 counties out of the 114 that are predominantly rural. In those counties, in 2016, roughly 80% of those folks did not have access to high-speed broadband. When you take that away from folks or don't make that available to folks, I can tell you, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, you're not going to grow the economy, you're not going to have the opportunities in education, and you're certainly not going to have the opportunities in health that you'd like to have with telehealth and all the new technologies that are out there today. So we began as a university to say, okay, what can we do? We do not put fiber in the ground. We're not a technology company, but we do have influence. How can we bring that to bear? We do have research. How can we bring that to bear? We do have tentacles through extension in every single county in the state of Missouri. We do have lots of expertise in education of how to use broadband. What can we do to bring all that to bear in a way, in a partnership that would really move us forward? So if we go to the next slide, what you'll see here is some of what we began to do. We looked at our 4 universities, and we knew that our researchers had great technical expertise. We also knew that influence was there. So as we began to put that together, we put together a broadband leadership team. We have people from schools of law. We have people from engineering. We have people from the College of Agriculture. We have people from various aspects working together, looking at how can we bring all that research and expertise to bear for Missourians. Well, what that did was led us to a next step, which was to convene, if you can go to the next slide, a conversation statewide about this. And this was what we called a broadband workshop. We assembled not only internally but externally over 100 experts around the state. That led to great conversations. And what it began to do was move us into an actionable plan where we could have experts in the university testing some of their research in communities. We could look at the health infrastructure and say, okay, is there a way to move better health care into certain parts of the state that maybe needs it? We looked at another resource rail that I'll talk about in a minute, that a place where people can go and learn the best practices and where the grants are and how you can convene that in the right way. And we also looked at how we could test some things in a community level. What are some things we could do there? Because one of the things that we realized, that even though people compare this to the expansion of rural electricity, which is truly a good analogy, those times were different. And the availability of funding to do this federally or to scale at a state level, there's limitations on that. And what it's going to take is partnerships between private industry, public interest, and also creativity between folks that is then supported by public investments like our legislator just shared and other things together to do this. But it has to be owned at that community level. So we began to work with our community partners and many organizations, groups like the Department of Economic Development here in the state of Missouri, the Department of Agriculture from a state agency perspective, the Missouri Farm Bureau was very active, the electric membership cooperatives, private industry. I could name off a list of those that were really interested in this and came together to convene in this workshop and to really talk about solutions, not about what we can't do, but what can we do. That led us to our next slide, which really focused on the area of a resource rail. And I would encourage you to go and look at this. It's a public good that we've created with a lot of experts. Mo Broadband is a resource rail where community people are now going across the state. They convene small groups. They begin to talk about how can we do this. Our extension faculty and staff in every county have been extraordinarily helpful in this, obviously, working together with community leaders, people in economic development, business leaders, county commissioners, school board members, convening to really work on these issues. It provides relevant data. It gives people they can look at mapping. They can see where it's available. Maybe they can't connect to it because of affordability, but we know it's there in the ground. It also allowed them to see other partners that might be willing to come in and help from a funding perspective or an expertise perspective. So this resource rail has become something, again, we launched it this summer after a couple of years of really thinking through this, of what we could do as a university to make a meaningful contribution to this conversation. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide really describes a county where it's, we looked at a county, picked out a best county that we could pick. And by that, I mean one that really needed this. Ballinger County is down in southeast Missouri, very rural, very agricultural, high need to have more broadband. And it was an express need from the community. And we identified there a need because if you look at the data, 4 out of 5 residents lack access. So the need is obvious. And we saw it not only from an economic standpoint, healthcare standpoint, but also educationally. And as COVID-19 hit, as we were in the midst of this, beginning to do this work, you can imagine that all that went up even again. We brought together stakeholders, and what's happening now in that community is they are working together as a pilot county to show what can be done. And then we're going to be able to take that, learn lessons, and then replicate that in other places. We're now looking at other counties that want to go through the same process. very deep in terms of process and in terms of facilitation and also partnering to allow them to own this at that community level, which we believe is really important. Next slide. Next thing we looked at was how do we begin again to continue the pressure on. One of the things that we've done is at the state level, we've really worked hard to bring about a structure that would enable the state to do a better job at this. When I arrived in 2016, there were folks in some of these organizations and state agencies that I've already mentioned really concerned about this. But one of the things that I saw and that they saw was we didn't have a state broadband office in the state of Missouri. And we said, you know, we really need that. We need somebody who's the point person every day gets up thinking about this, other than the person who doesn't have it. And so we created that along with the governor's office, and it's now housed in the Department of Economic Development. We were definitely pushing hard to get that done. The legislature was good enough to put some funds in to get it started, and also to put some grant funds in there, as was just described by our earlier presenter. Some of the CARES Act money in the last few months has been designated to do broadband expansion in different ways. But one of the things that we've done is become a sort of a megaphone. This describes a lot of the media we've been able to draw this through doing editorials. We've done 2 major editorials that came from our office that went statewide, went viral, and picked up a lot of speed in local newspapers. It creates conversation. So we think our power as an institution of influence, of raising conversation, then creates action locally. And we've certainly tried to do that. So again, it's not only what you know technologically, but what influence can you bring to bear from your alumni, from your various constituents and supporters to make sure people understand the importance of this issue. So as I wrap up today with our next slide, I want you to know that we are certainly open to more conversation and look forward to the questions you may have as we finish out today. So we'll look forward to those questions. Next, I'll go to Dwayne.
All right, thank you, Marshall. I'm Dwayne Schell. I am the Chief Technology Officer for the state of North Dakota, and as I listened to my prior to presenters and panelists, I'm going to talk about a story I think that's a little bit different into where we are today and how we've gotten to where we are, and applaud the efforts that my prior to panelists have done to continue to move the ball forward within their respective states. Let's pop to the next slide. So as we talk about this story, I think we have to set the stage on how all this began. Our story around broadband, particularly from an access perspective, is a little bit unique with how much broadband we've got deployed across our state, particularly when you think about the geography and demographics. Fairly large state, very rural state, less than 1 million people in the entire state. So the geography and demographics make it a little bit different and provide it an interesting backdrop for how we got started and why we've got a lot of fiber in the ground. And this story started, frankly, back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, there were leaders at the state level, leaders at K through 12 level, leaders within higher ed, as well as our legislative assembly, who made the decision that if we were ever going to have a chance to get broadband in any substantive level within our state, we needed to partner and to collaborate and begin working together. So the decision was made in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, to provide a network for all public organizations across the state through the state of North Dakota. And at that point, what we call our network today is where StageNet was born. And StageNet was created to serve all of state government, serve all of local government, serve the K-12 community, as well as our higher education community. And in those days, clearly we didn't have all the infrastructure in place yet, but that was the goal that was set forth. Next slide. So since that time, it's just been a lot of stories about partnership and collaboration. You know, all organizations at the public level working together, trying to find creative ways to get this done. The other interesting thing that took place in the early 90s was the creation of an organization called Dakota Carrier Network. And this is an organization that is owned by all of our rural telecommunications companies and can act as a single provider statewide. And originally created as almost a middle mile provider, and enabled them to act as a single company for anybody looking for services that spanned across a multitude of geographies or telecommunications companies, particularly those rural telcos that we talked about. Next slide. So as we look at the next slide, this starts to paint a pretty interesting picture. This graphic shows broadband, in particular fiber penetration across those rural telephone cooperatives that exist across the country. And you can see the geography there up in the northern part of the country, where North Dakota is, that it's a whole lot of color there. And the partnerships, the collaborations that have taken place, the decision to serve all public entities and really establish that anchor tenant model that is a commonplace approach in a lot of broadband programs. That decision to do that, combined with that creation of Dakota Carrier Network, which has obviously a big focus on some of the more rural areas of our state, has evolved to a point where we've got fiber to all of our counties statewide. We've got fiber going to every school district in the state. We've got fiber going to every significant state government building, and clearly we've got fiber going to every campus. And from a public sector organization, today they all share a 100 gig backbone with 100 gig or more connectivity to the internet. A little over a year ago, we were able to get to the point where every one of our school districts has a minimum of 1 gig going to their respective school districts. I like to tell the story of one of our small school districts. It's a K-8 school district. It's in the western part of our state. It's right on the edge of Theodore Roosevelt National Park. It is still a country school. There's about a dozen kids that go there, and for many years we were getting them satellite internet, and that was the best we could do. But I think we're giving over 100 meg per student right now today with a gig circuit going into that K-8 school district with a dozen kids. So kind of a fun story to talk about. But that's really been the model that has helped drive things forward, combined with a provider community that's just been very forward thinking and innovative. As we stepped into the pandemic, we knew we had a pretty substantial fiber footprint across the state, particularly to our public entities. We also knew that we had a pretty reasonable connection to the home with all the work that had been done through the various programs over the last 20, 30 years to deploy fiber across the state. But we didn't necessarily have a good understanding of where we were in relationship to student connectivity. Let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I should have moved to the next slide already. So partnership, working with internet providers for creativity. Let's move one more forward, please. So this is another map that kind of gives you an indication of where our rural providers reside. We've got some very forward-thinking owners in those organizations. They've taken advantage of a lot of different programs over the years, and you know, anything that's not white is a territory that's covered by our rural provider community. Within our urban areas, what we call an urban area, are larger communities that are, you know, anywhere from 30 to 150,000 folks. Obviously, we've got a lot of other providers in those, cable companies and so on and so forth. But this gives you another view of where we are. Next slide, please. So as we stepped into the pandemic, it was a rapid move to telework. It was a rapid move to distance education. And we were obviously aware that we needed to get students connected. We knew all of the education communities were well connected, didn't have a good understanding of where the student population was, but we were feeling confident with the work that had been done and the fiber and other broadband deployments that had taken care of over the years. So a quick, easy way for us to figure this out is not only do we provide a network statewide for a lot of organizations, we provide a lot of hosting of services. One of the services we provide hosting for is a student information system. We provide and assist with that for the K-12 community, a single student information system statewide, and we partner with our higher education community on their student information system as well. So it was very easy for us to extract the home address of all of our students across the state. As we worked through the K-12 elements of that, we identified roughly 2,000 households across the state that were not being served out of our roughly 120,000 students. Working across those databases of which the providers have in our student information system. We identified those 2,000, were carved up the respective territories, worked with the Dakota Carrier Network, the Broadband Association of North Dakota, and our urban providers. Midcom Communication is one of the larger ones, but several others shared with everybody their respective unserved addresses, and then worked with the individual school districts across the state to very quickly get those folks connected. Of the 2,000 households roughly that were identified, we were able to hook up the vast majority of them. We had about 148 households that we were didn't have access. So we, like everyone across the country, went after a number of creative solutions. You know, heard my fellow panelists talk about people sitting in parking lots, adjusted some and increased Wi-Fi capacity at the libraries, at the schools. Some of our providers within the Broadband Association put up a couple mobile hotspots on portable towers to help with the handful of folks that we had left that were unserved. So great partnership, great collaboration with the provider community to be able to get through this very interesting last year that we've all been faced. As we stepped into it last spring, our provider community was exceedingly generous. Those households that were unserved, they turned up access without any conversation on cost. Clearly, that's not a sustainable model for the providers, and as much as everybody appreciated the generosity, they deserve something for providing that service. As part of the CARE Act program, we were able to allocate some funds and provided some grants out to the districts to be able to sustain this year into the current school year. And as we embark upon our legislative assembly that comes into session in January, that conversation will continue as to how we're going to sustain this long term. So looking forward to those conversations. Next slide. So we just talked a little bit about this, where we were, and talked about a lot of access that we have, and that is true. But our goal is to not be satisfied with where we are today. So continuing to work with our provider communities. There's a handful of places left that need work, largely in some pretty rural areas of our state, trying to identify programs, policies, procedures, programs that can assist to get us to the goal of striving for that 100%. Because until we get to that 100%, I think the job's not done. And we're optimistic that we're only a couple of years away from doing that. So with that, I'll pause and look forward to questions and turn it over to our next panelist.
Thanks, Dwayne. Everyone, my name is Adrian Seuda. Sorry, I cannot turn on my camera I can't figure this thing out for the life of me, so my apologies. I'm here to talk about Chicago Connected. As mentioned earlier, I'm the Deputy Chief of Family Community Engagement with Chicago Public Schools. And we launched Chicago Connected in response to the difficult decision that we had to make earlier this year to close CPS amid the pandemic. And so if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So Chicago Connected started off, we had a partnership with Kids First Chicago. They are a nonprofit organization that does research, and they put out a brief back in April that suggested that 1 in 5 children in the city of Chicago lacked access to stable internet. And so, one of the things I appreciate about the partnership with Kids First Chicago is that they took it a step further and not only identified the problem, which we knew was pretty widespread based on engagement numbers that we were tracking as a district, but they also started to convene various partners and talking to the funding community to say, hey, here's a problem that we've identified that we know is having a great deal of impact on students accessing content. What can we do about it? And so Chicago Connected is a partnership between Chicago Public Schools, Kids First Chicago, the City of Chicago, and the philanthropic partners across the city. And right now, as it stands, we'll talk a little bit about metrics, but had we not had the research brief and the data to clearly identify and articulate what the need was, I can't say that I'd be talking to you about this innovative program today. So I think for me, it stresses the importance of having a research partner that can support the cause. Next slide. So one of the key things that we noticed, so Chicago has a total of 77 community areas, and we noticed that the disproportionate numbers of families that lacked access to internet were really concentrated in 15 key community areas. And so that gave us the opportunity to really think about this from a targeted, in a targeted way, rather than a blanketed kind of one size fits all approach. Knowing that each community had a different need allowed us to think about this in terms of with a local context. And so we were able to work with not only the school communities, but also start to think about the potential partners that would be able to support us in expanding broadband service to families. So I can talk a little bit here about Chicago Connected in and of itself. The program is designed to offer internet service at no cost to families for up to 4 years. We've got funding for the first 2 years that are being picked up by philanthropy and by using CARES money. And eventually the hope is to transition the full cost, have it rolled into the district. So CPS would allocate budget items for this program. Let's continue it. Next slide. So a couple things that make Chicago Connected unique, in my opinion. One, it's currently it's the largest and longest city-run internet accessibility program in the country. Our aim is to service 100,000 students. We're about a little bit over a third of the way there to date. The focus is on high-speed internet with fixed line household internet, meaning wired broadband service. It includes a Wi-Fi hotspot component that focuses on students in temporary living situations. And the small percentage of homes where wire service cannot be used. And I can talk a little bit about that. In Chicago, I'm assuming much like in different potential in rural parts of the country where, there are some dwellings that are deemed as non-serviceable by the internet service providers. For us, what that looks like is, a residential home that is designed as a single family home may have a build out or a finished basement that's rented out. The internet service provider can't distinguish that the basement is a standalone unit based on coding, and so in their in their system they can't offer two wired internet services to one household. And so in instances where a family's home or dwelling cannot be serviced by the internet service provider, we have partnered with T-Mobile to offer hotspots. And so those families receive a hotspot. If they've got more than 3 children, they can get up to 2 hotspots to ensure that students can still access virtual content with stability. Student household eligibility. So another thing that I think makes the program unique is that we identified the households that would be deemed eligible by leveraging criteria. The University of Illinois Chicago designed an equity hardship index that basically it uses census data, income data to identify neighborhoods in the city that score high on their hardship index. It includes crime rate, poverty rate, distance to grocery stores, all things that we know go into effect for lower income neighborhoods. In addition to the UIC hardship index, which was a helpful tool, we used Medicaid eligibility, free or reduced meals, though a majority of our students in our district do receive free meals. It's one of the indicators that we used. And then there are additional, student level factors. And this is, measuring for disadvantage academically. So our diverse learner population or special ed population in our English language learning population. Next slide. As mentioned, what I think has made our program successful to date is the number of critical partners that we have at the table. We meet with the internet service providers 3 times a week, where we discuss updates on connectivity. We are able to surface any potential issues that are arising. For example, the example I gave of basement dwelling units that are not serviceable. Those came about, we were able to come up with a solution for that after working with the internet service providers and identifying, in real time, essentially what the challenges that families were experiencing. Kids First Chicago, as I mentioned, they're not only supported with the research brief, but are helping build out the dashboard where we're going to be able to, in real time, see and track the families that are now online. And then the philanthropic community. So Children's First Fund is CPS's foundation extension. They help with fundraising and grant making. And then the last one that I think is important to mention here are the community-based organizations. So as I mentioned earlier, and you can go to the next slide for this, community-based organizations form a critical backbone in most of the communities that are disconnected. So that map of 15 high need communities, not every community is going to have a community-based organization as a partner. That said, we thought it was important for two reasons. One, trusted messenger in the community. So the difference between, either Comcast or RCN reaching out to a household to let them know that they're eligible, or even CPS for that matter in some instances, and then having a trusted community organization that has been offering family supports, be it healthcare support, support with digital literacy. It's an opportunity for us. It was an opportunity to create a localized effort and have boots on the ground in some of our high target areas. And then each principal in, we've got over 600 schools in CPS, and each principal received their unique roster of Chicago connected eligible families. And again, this goes back to what I just mentioned about that trusted messenger, and making sure that, a principal, the families know who their principal is. They engage with them on a regular basis versus, even me for that matter, who, some bureaucrat that's, supports the district is very different than my school's principal. And so it's really important in our end to put the power in the hands of those that are trusted by families. Because anytime you're promoting something as free or free to you, especially in communities that have been marginalized, it's a hard sell. It gives off that too good to be true kind of mentality. Is this really free? And so having principals and community partners on the ground to help validate the program has been extremely helpful. The next slide shows just, the organizations that we've partnered, going back to the 15 community neighborhoods that we had listed out in the beginning. You can see here that we've identified multiple partners to service those areas. We have some citywide partners that have the additional capacity and service the entire state of Illinois. And so they've got, a pretty robust staffing on their end to support this initiative. Next slide. And so our outreach efforts to date. So, early on, we knew that, to give context here, for families that were eligible for the program, they received a letter in the mail via snail mail. So traditional, they received an email notifying them of their eligibility. They received a robocall letting them know that they're eligible, a robo text notifying them not only that they're eligible, but also giving them their unique Chicago connected code. And in addition to supplement all of those, tactics, we've been doing direct outbound calls. And here's where we started to, the moment we started to introduce these outbound calls, and these numbers are a little bit out of date by this point. My staff's made over 36,000 phone calls to date, and the CBOs have made close to 50,000 phone calls to date. One of the things that we started to see is exponential growth the moment you have a real life human being on the other line, calling you, making it personal, able to walk you through the process, able to answer your questions, able to verify, validate the program itself and answer any potential questions that you may have. We started to see, at first a trickle of, 200 additions and then 300 additions. And then we started to see conversion rates of up to 1,000 conversions a week. And all of that is directly in line with the moment we started to invest in that direct consumer outreach. And so we've doubled down on those efforts. I've increased my call center capacity at CPS, and CBOs have also increased their call capacity because getting a robocall, getting a robotext, or even an email, we know oftentimes, especially with hard to reach families, they might miss it. But getting a real life person to walk someone through the process, to help them navigate, to even be able to patch through directly to the internet service providers, that level of service quality is what we're measuring and what we're seeing pay dividends in terms of families getting connected online. In addition, part of what also makes Chicago Connected unique is that we offer a digital literacy component to this. So the CBOs that I mentioned early on, their work is twofold. First, it's helping us with outreach efforts and getting families connected. but we're going to start to make a pivot this month towards digital literacy. So, now that you're connected, for a lot of our families, this may be the first time they have access to the internet, and that's a lot for a lot for some folks to undertake on their own. And so community-based organizations are supporting by offering families workshops, skills building exercises. We've partnered with Google, we've partnered with the CBOs and with the internet service providers to offer robust digital literacy supports for these families. And it stems all the way from, opening your computer on day one to more technical skills that are going to get families ready for the job market. Next slide. I don't know of other folks on the call, other panelists on the call that are dealing with some of the blowback, but when you've got a program of the magnitude that we're talking about, the service hundreds of thousands of families, you also start to get a lot of, the naysayers kind of putting out myths and kind of stirring up things or confusing families that would potentially dissuade them from engaging and from participating. We've seen that at the district level. Some families saying it could take you up to 4 years to get your connection. Some families were hearing that they needed to share a social security number to sign up, which is not the case for the program, at least for us. Some families were told that in order to sign up, they were going to need to pass a background check. And so we started to notice, and this is where the benefit of doing the direct outreach has been instrumental, because we're able to hear directly from our families what they were hearing. And one, course correct in real time, but then two, also update our frequently asked questions and promote that widely via all digital mediums to make sure that families know the myths versus the facts. And we're constantly adapting this slide here, which, again, when you're trying to do a public service good, I understand why some folks would have some skepticism, but I also think that this is why having the way we built this out has really helped us to course correct in real time. Next slide. And also, what we're learning. One of the things that we have committed to as a collective, the city, the district, the internet service providers, the philanthropic circle, is to be understanding and be iterative. And so, as we're hearing things from families, as we're hearing things from the users, we're able to adapt. And this is why we've got, multiple calls per week. Actually, I've got a call in a few minutes here with the internet service providers, where we're able to collect kind of what we're hearing from our users, vet it to verify that it's a real issue and not just an isolated issue, but check, is this an isolated case that's troubleshoot, or is this a broader systemic problem that we need to address in policy? It gives us the opportunity to adapt and also partner with the service providers to make sure that we're able to troubleshoot and course correct policies. Next slide. And part of what we're learning is early on we were going fast, and so now that we've had the time to kind of slow down a little bit in terms of trying to get the program up and running, it's up and running. We're starting to see great success and connectivity numbers that are appealing. We've been able to take a step back and kind of slow down. And one of the things that we built out over the last month is this eligibility tool where a family can enter in a unique identifier, in this case, their student's identification and their student's date of birth, and in real time verify if they're eligible for the program. And if they're not eligible for the program, what immediately pops up for them are resources that are either free and or at low cost, so that we can, continue to get smarter as we go along. And I think that is the last slide for me.
Fabulous. Thank you to all of our presenters. I will remind our attendees that if you have a question, you can submit that now via the questions tab on your control panel. While we're waiting for any new questions to come in, we did have a few questions that came in earlier. So Representative Carfagna, what do you see as the key characteristics for a successful statewide grant program and that will make sure that it ensures equitable utilization throughout the state? We can't hear you.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, thank you.
Good, thanks. It's got to be technology neutral. Like I said, it can't be something that's going to play favorites. Everybody needs to feel like they have an equitable shot at applying for these funds. We need to set up the appropriate guardrails. So we need to make sure that whether it is a fixed wireless or a cable product, that we are going to deliver speeds of at least 25.3. And we need to make sure that we're monitoring it on an ongoing basis. We've built speed tests into this program so that after the construction is complete, that we make sure that we hold them to their word if they're going to be taking these funds and making it part of their private footprint. That we're going to hold them to it for a series of years, and we also want to capture some important data from that. We want to see what the take rate is going to be. We want to see what the rates are going to be. And the other key, just working in the industry for so long, is that we obviously want them to present their bill and information, the financials that are going to go into this, but we don't want to make it so cumbersome that they aren't going to apply for it. Because at the end of the day, I can't force any of these ISPs to take advantage of this program and apply for these funds to build out. They're going to put skin in the game. They're going to fulfill everything within their build-out formula, and then we're going to get them over that hurdle. But I mean, I can't force them to take advantage of the program. So, we want to make sure that we're asking for the right things, that we are providing some positive reinforcement. We're going to encourage them to draw down federal funds or to commingle funds if any of the locals want to chip in and help drive down the ask of the state. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Stewart, in your presentation, you mentioned involving folks like the Missouri Farm Bureau. Can you talk a little bit more about why you brought organizations such as the Farm Bureau to the conversation?
Glad to. I mean, they were, in total transparency, obviously they were very concerned about it. It was a concern of their members. I actually had arrived here in the summer of 2016, and they actually had me speak at their annual meeting of just sort of the meeting before the meeting of presidents and sort of the leaders from the counties and their organization. And I talked about broadband because I'd already been seeing it for about 90 days at that point in traveling. And man, the room went electric. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, he gets it. He understands. And part of the reason I got it is because I grew up in rural. I understood that, but also in deference to our folks who live in urban, as has already been said, this is an issue that's not just rural. It's rural and urban. It is a national issue that shows up in different ways in different places. So what I really worked with them on is, let's make this a Missouri issue. Obviously, they're very focused on rural, but we brought in partners like the Urban League of Kansas City and others that are really interested in this. So what you find in this is a very interesting group of partners. And a lot of our work in the university is really, we sort of can provide, if we position it right, sort of this common ground where you bring a Farm Bureau and then more urban organizations and organizations that are more maybe into education or health. We kind of become this convener and policymakers too. We've had a wonderful, I didn't mention that earlier, but a lot of our legislators are extremely interested in this. So, Farm Bureau and others, to me, it's not something that's going to be one solution. It's going to be multiple solutions attacking the same problem that shows itself in different ways. And so you have to have that kind of coalition. And it is the way you get things done. It's been, again, it's gotten the attention of policymakers. It's gotten the attention of the providers. It's gotten the attention of local people saying, hey, I can't blame it on somebody else. I got to take action. The only way you get there is get everybody together. And that's what we've been, as that convener, and then now put out some resources that can help them locally to take action appropriately in this area.
Thank you. Mr. Shell, North Dakota's done a great job of collaborating and connecting your students. So what do you see as the next big step for North Dakota's broadband community other than just funding?
So I think our goals, we talked about them a little in the conversation, is our goal is every household is connected, and we're getting close, and we want to finish that. More importantly, and probably the next big conquest is making sure we've got a pervasive wireless coverage across the state. Another area where we're making good strides, but when we think about the industries that drive our state, the agriculture industry, the energy industry, and a lot of other things that are out there, being able to support wireless, pervasive broadband anywhere to drive precision agriculture, to drive the IoT types of devices that will enable and empower the energy industry, other wireless networks that will assist with some of the work that we're doing in the unmanned aerial vehicle industry. We're in the midst of working in partnership with a number of folks through our Grand Sky drone park, in partnership with the FAA and many players, to drive a beyond visual line of sight capability for unmanned aerial vehicles. So a lot of our focus is how do we drive that wireless broadband network to support all these other areas of industry that are going to need it as the world continues to evolve and grow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think for the last question, I will just have that for Mr. Segura. This is kind of more of a comment, I think, than a question. But you made a great point that free is a hard sell. You need the trusted partner on the ground. So what percentage of your students do you think you have reached that are in need? And do you see being able to reach all of your students that are in need?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, this is where we've equipped principals with their rosters of eligible families. Right now, we've got 100,000 students that are in queue to receive the free service. Now, I will say, in our outreach to some families, some of them already have existing packages that they've budgeted for, or that they don't want to turn down, right? Because what they're getting here is essentially the Internet Essentials program. And so for some families, they prefer to keep their more premium package. So we have received a few rejections, though those are far few in between. Our goal at the end of the day is to reach that 100,000 student mark. And I think that we've got a pretty aggressive campaign to do just that now. We've spent over the summer kind of iterating our practices and building out best practices to do just that. So to answer the question of when, it's until all 100,000 kids are online.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Are there any last minute comments that any of our panelists would like to make? Okay, if not, I'm going to say thank you to each of our panelists. I think you did a great job today. I definitely heard all of you talking about community and partnerships and collaborations as being key, no matter what the other challenges are within our individual states. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us today, as well as thank you to our attendees for joining us today. For those of you that did attend, please complete the survey that you will receive from us shortly. And if you're interested in any more information from MEC about any of the topics discussed today, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us. Again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.